So, now we are entering into module 3, which is on urban environmental trajectories in India. So, the focus now would be on the Indian subcontinent. So, this module will focus on urban environmental trajectories in India, discussing various plans, policies, visions and missions. But before we move into the more contemporary conjecture, which is flooded with urban plans, urban policies, also trying to incorporate the environment in the urban planning and management discourses, it will be important for us also to look back into our roots and to learn from the from our historical past, that how the relationship between urban and environment to a great extent led to the complex processes of state formation. So, we can get a lot of clue from like what happened during the days of antiquity, and it's I mean it's good news that research addressing this addressing this intersection between urban and environment, it has already started. And I think to a great extent we owe to the Marxist historians on early India. So, I will be discussing that a bit here, but what I am saying is that before we move into India's contemporary urban scenario or scene, it will be important for us to also understand like urban environmental dynamics, though I mean it is quite difficult to trace the environment from the urban or within the urban, but the historical works, secondary literature which had depended a lot on the archaeological and literary sources, it provide very fresh insights on city nature entanglements during our ancient times. So, hence this presentation would be all about the various waves of urbanization during antiquity, and I will be covering both the ancient and medieval period, because the idea is to provide coverage to the pre-colonial time or temporal scale. And though North India or the Ganges Valley can be considered as the epicenter of urbanization, but yet it is important to look into the regional dimensions. So, different other urban centers like Kalinga, like several cities in Bengal, like cities in Malwa region, that is like western and central India also developed. So, it will be important to also delve deep into these regional dimensions, along with focusing on urbanization in North India. And finally, like we would be actually, as I mentioned, that we would be in this presentation we would be reading urbanism by tracing larger and complex processes of urban environmental entanglements in these first cities or cities which were built during the early historic period. So, yes, mainly like two major waves of urbanization during ancient times, and like the first urbanization period mainly constricted to the mature Harappan era, followed by the second urbanization period, is also known as the early historic period, and the cities are known as early historic cities that flourished between 5th century BC and 3rd century AD. And I must also discuss the the development of this exciting new avenue called historical archaeology, because historical archaeology or archaeology of urbanism, it actually accounts for varied ecological, geographical and political conditions. It makes us aware of the socio-political and economic entanglements in urban spaces, role of ideologies, the impact of technological advancement. So, everything together. So, I think like archaeology of urbanism or historical archaeology make us aware or draw our attention to the cityness of the city. Before we move into the Indian context, I think it will be very important for us to discuss Gordon Child. So, why should we discuss Gordon Child? Because Gordon Child, his influence had been enormous on the Marxist historians, shedding light on early India or early like historic period and also early historic cities of the Indian subcontinent. So, Gordon Childe, who was he? So, Gordon Childe was the most influential archaeologist of the 20th century, and he wrote two seminal books. So, one is this Man Makes Himself, which came out in 1936, and What Happened in History, which came out in 1942. And when we were history students, so when I was an UG student, I had to read these two books, and these were the first two books which I read during my university days, and which to a great extent kind of like transformed my perspective, and my exposure to the discipline of history. So, anyway, beyond this personal note, I think it's important all of us should really go through these two particular books by Gordon Childe. But here, instead of focusing on these two books, I would mainly draw your attention to one particular article by Gordon Childe, which came out in 1950 in the journal called Town Planning Review, and here he suggested the 10-point model of urbanization, and he focused on two revolutions. One is this Neolithic revolution, and more importantly the urban revolution. So, what is so important about Gordon Childe is that he kind of he applied social models to archaeological data. So, he used hardcore archaeological data to understand the complex evolution of society. So, he says that he shows that how like in Neolithic, why Neolithic period should be considered as Neolithic revolution. So, what was so revolutionary about Neolithic revolution was that a lot of major changes or transformation took place. So, for example, like there was a transformation shift from sedentary lifestyle to from like a nomadic lifestyle to sedentary lifestyle, because there was an agricultural revolution through like domestication of plants and animals, and there was a shift from hunting gathering to farming. So, these like kind of crafted lot of other changes, social changes, like there was an evolution of more complex division of labor. But if we consider urban revolution, which is definitely connected to Neolithic revolution, we see that urban revolution, the society became more complex, because there we can locate more complex social stratification, and economic activities of all sorts actually expanded. So, there was the growth or the emergence of the first cities. But what is so fascinating about the Childean paradigm is that he traced these interconnected series of changes, but his argument or his focus did not remain constricted to the development of cities. So, he talks about the growth of cities as part and parcel of state level societies. So, this process very much linked to the rise of the state. So, he locates cities within the larger processes of states formation, and also talks about the urban rural interlinkages. And so, these are some of the like ancient civilizations. So, No Cities, No Civilizations, and Stuart Piggott. And Childe, through his archaeological data, he could discuss this complex evolution of society. So, this is also like he argues that he talks about the link between urbanism and early state dynamics, and how these early state societies were like urban societies having very large and dense cities. Also, Gordon Childe was very fascinated with the developments that occurred in Harappa, most importantly development in terms of developments in terms of civic infrastructures. So, he studied urban planning processes for the two cities of Indus Valley civilization, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. He studied municipal governance and also network infrastructures, and he was fascinated with these two cities, and he says that many well planned streets and a magnificent system of drains regularly cleared out reflects the vigilance of some regular municipal government, right. So, its authority was strong enough to secure the observance of town planning by laws, and the maintenance of approved lines for streets and lanes over several reconstructions rendered necessary by floods. So, this passage it shows or it demonstrates that how he analyzed archaeological data, archaeological data to come up with social analysis, to come up with like what was going on in the society during that particular point of time. So, very clearly this magnificent system of drains, he argues here that how this shows that a very regular municipal governance mechanism was actually present in this Harappan city. So, I think like Gordon Child is fascinating because Gordon Child really kind of, I mean his work is located at the interface between archaeology as a as a very technical hard science field, and and the social the social ramification or social manifestations from this hardcore technical data. So, yes, as I mentioned earlier that the Marxist historians of early India, they were highly influenced by the research conducted by Gordon Child, and they were also inspired by several other frameworks, but Childian paradigm had a very long lasting influence on these early, the Marxist historians of early India. So, for example, R.S. Sharma, when he started writing in 1960s, so I think he did exhaustive research to try to understand the causative forces behind urbanism during the days of antiquity. And he pointed out that that urbanism was a result of improved knowledge of cultivation and production of surplus. So, this surplus surplus was very much it was considered to be the most important variable leading to the birth of cities. And iron technology. So, iron being discovered in the Etranjikara, in Etranjikara in Ita district in UP around like 9th century BC. So, iron also played a very important role because through iron intensive agriculture could happen, and there was agricultural expansion. So, which actually also through iron or iron technology urban settlements also emerged and also at the cost of deforestation. So, there is data which shows massive deforestation in Bihar through the use of iron technology, and also talks about how agricultural expansion and generation of surplus gave rise to urban settlements. But there are also counter arguments. For example, Makhan Lal, he has shown or he argues that there was never any need of any large scale forest clearance for urbanism to happen or for urbanization to occur in the northern part of the Indian subcontinent. And he talks about these urban locations on river banks, and he says that socio-economic political variables played more important role and could actually surpass technological innovation hypothesis. But we also have historical evidences, sources being compiled by historians like A. Ghosh, talking about city hinterland strong connection, and also talking about the importance of iron technology. I think Ramila Thapar should be discussed, and she comes into the picture with her brilliant book called Lineage to State, which was published in 1983, and Ramila Thapar definitely talks about this surplus, and she says that this surplus was definitely a result of the invention of iron and the use of iron technology that led to agricultural expansion. And then when more and more lands were being brought under cultivation, so there was a desire, political desire to kind of control control technologies, tools and technologies, which also led to this generation of surplus, and the surplus provided stable base to the urban settlement or to urban population. So, this is the hypothesis. So, she talks about more labor, land and irrigation. So, when more labor, land, irrigation, all these became possible, so it created the context for the development of cities and towns in ancient India, and again mainly in the Ganges Valley. So, all these historians like R. S. Sharma, Makhan Lal, Ramila Thapar, they had conducted research on the Ganges Valley and on the northern on North India, on different districts and different regions of North India. So, Ramila Thapar also talks or shows that how uneven distribution or uneven access to iron implements and technologies etc. also led to the development of circuits of trade and medium of exchange. And the local circuits of trade, it actually linked the village units, gramas, with the local trade center, nigamas, and finally these were linked to the nagaras or the towns, which was the main trading center and the center of exchange. And Thapar argues that urban locations could mainly be traced on major overland routes, rivers, or at the melting point of two ecological zones. So, which be a testimony to the fact that there was lot of development in trade and exchange networks during that particular point of time. Now, apart from these developments, these urban developments in northern India, and apart from northern India being considered as the epicenter of urbanization, urbanism also it ushered in different other regions of the subcontinent, including eastern India, including western and central India, and also parts of South India. And South India, it emerged little late, which we will discuss in the subsequent slides. So, focusing on eastern India, we find two belts quite important, like Odisha and Bengal. So, in Odisha, like Kalinga actually developed as part of the exchange network that was established here in contact to the rulers of North India. So, the Hathigumpha inscription of Kharvela, it sheds light on the fact that Kalinga was acquired by the Nandas of Magadha and also by the Mauryan Empire. So, and the Mauryans were interested in Kalinga out of their mercantile interest, and so Kalinga, of course, this external variable played an important role. It provided an impetus impetus so far as the growth of urbanism was concerned in Kalinga, Orissa. There is dearth of research, very less research, scanty research on Bengal, but definitely some research on the emergence of very important cities, again cities most of these located on river banks, and also emerging as very important centers of trade, being connected to the major nodes of trade and also being connected to North India. So, areas like Bangar, Kotasur, Tomluk in Midnapur, and Chandraketugarh. So, Chakraborty has done a lot of research on Chandraketugarh, and so Chandraketugarh, you can understand the ecological location of this particular site. So, it is the largest site in the delta, Bengal delta, Ganga delta, and the other sites are appreciably smaller. So, the region was prone to low energy flood. For this reason, though most urban centers of the period had brick structures. So, see how ecology also determined the urban layout and urban structure and urban planning during those times. So, as it was prone to low energy flood, so most urban centers of the period had brick structures. Chandraketugarh had mud houses. The brick structures in the site appear only when the floods became less regular, right. So, so again the Childian paradigm, if you remember. So, how archaeological data provides a lot of insights about social ways of life or social ways of livelihood during historical times. So, the settlement developed into an urban center in response to the prospect of trade. The linear pattern of settlements emphasized the importance of the rivers, which acted as channels for communication. So, yes, so rivers playing a very important role, being arteries of trade and communication. So, Western India, again lot of research, recent research by Irani, Kumaran, and Vasant has written a fascinating book called The City and the Country in Early India. So, the major focus being on the Malwa region, but apart from Kumaran, Irani and Vasant, one fascinating research has been done by Julia Shaw. So, Julia Shaw is mainly an archaeologist, but Julia Shaw, like she is the principal investigator for, she was the principal investigator for this Sanchi survey project, and in the Sanchi survey project she actually applied reflexive multi-stage survey methodology, right. So, she actually was interested to understand the influence of Buddhism in the Vidisha Sanchi area, but she decided not to constrict her research by just concentrating on the Buddhist monastic sites, but also to kind of understand the wider archaeological landscape, so that like the social processes, the political processes could be, I mean the nuances could actually be could actually be explored through by reading, by tracing cities interconnections and entanglements with a wider archaeological landscape. So, and I think like Julia Shaw's like project, it's also it's very important in terms of water management research, because she also kind of she applied temporal and spatial data sets to understand the temporal and spatial relationships between monasteries, dams, settlements, and she also studied the non-Buddhist cult sites, because her understanding, I mean she wanted to explore the relationship between the Sangha and the local region and local population. So, this is a very important research where which studies the deeper and dispersed entanglements between city and its wider archaeological landscape. And also yes, in all these researches the importance of like small and major rivers and hence gradual increase of settlements in alluvial zones come out very sharp. So, South India the major name is Champak Lakshmi. So, Champak Lakshmi ma'am had done a lot of research on South India, mainly focusing on the Tamil region, and it's like South India actually had a late beginning, and mainly like urbanism or urbanization processes started since the early medieval period, when maritime trade, orthodox religion and wet agriculture started taking root. And one of the reasons that why urbanization had a late entry in this region, it can be explained by the fact that the area was physically partitioned into extremely diverse eco zones. So, and we get to know about these diverse eco zones in the Tinai text, which is part of the Sangam literature. So, it talks about these extremely diverse ecological zones, like for example the Kurinsi Tinai, which is this hilly backwoods forest, Mullai Tinai, pastoral tract, Natal Tinai, coastal region, Marutam Tinai, riverine wetland plains, and Palai Tinai, parched arid zone. And all these diverse ecosystem zones, so there are interactions between these micro zones, which led to the integration of smaller settlements called kuti into macro economies. So, all these micro zones were integrated were integrated into macro zones, and there were formation of like areas of attraction in coastal deltaic plains rather than urban spaces. And I think to a great extent hence geography becomes a key determinant or a variable in terms of this delayed urbanizing or urbanization process for South India. So, with this finally, we come to the medieval situation or the medieval period, and for a long period of time like the Marxian Asiatic mode of production thesis was seemed to be a valid theory. And Marx talked about this Asiatic mode of production, where he talked about where he distinguished between feudal Europe and pre-modern medieval India. And but later this Marxian hypothesis, Marxian Asiatic mode of production theory was it was countered, it was critically interrogated, and people like Irfan Habib pointed out that by collecting empirical data and very hardcore analysis of those empirical insights showed that no, like medieval India did not encounter any stagnation, rather like it was very I mean developed in terms of urban development, in terms of agricultural development, in terms of trade and transactions, internal trade transactions, and also maritime commerce. So, urban markets or koshbas emerged, which definitely challenged the theory of economic stagnation propagated by this Asiatic mode of production MP. So, a koshba was a typical like rural center, and so the peasants sold their products in these koshbas, and the koshbas so the towns fetched the products from these rural centers. So, but there are controversies. Yes, there are controversies among historians about this issue of dependence between village communities and urban areas. So, for example, Irfan says that the nature of trade or the nature of dependence was one directional, because the towns were mainly dependent on the villages. But Chetan Singh he showed that how this was a mutually interdependent and reciprocal relationship, because the peasants also looked forward to gain profits by selling their market produce in this in the koshbas, and the urban residents were also the buyers or the consumers of the goods that the peasants actually supplied. And Satish Chandra he actually provides a kind of a balanced outlook where he says or where he talks about an integral part of the growth of agricultural production and the growth of money economy. So, and the processes were parallel and simultaneous. So, coming to the final part of this presentation, I think the towns or the medieval cities, they are actually icons of or they are harbingers of ecological wisdom, and also like ecological aesthetics, because like for example, the medieval cities like Agra or Fatehpur Sikri, they are famous as garden cities, and gardens I mean it occupied a central part, it occupied a central part of the landscape of Mughal cities. So, gardens had different meanings, different use values, etc. So, it was a place of final abode. Mughal tomb gardens are so famous, and J. Dickey has done research on these tomb gardens, and he says that a tomb garden amounts to a material anticipation of immaterial bliss, right. And these were places of refuge and recreation, places for feasts and receptions, and also places signifying abdication as well as occupying kingship. Humayun's riverfront garden is so famous in history, and it had like rested on this four two-story structures, which were again connected to 4 barges. And here lot of lot of events and festivities, music fetes and even honors were conducted. Fatehpur Sikri, Agra, these are all garden cities, and Agra Agra has this epithet of garden city, and Fatehpur Sikri, like if you just if you concentrate on the inner part of the city, like the inner walls, till date it has like 29 gardens, which is beautiful, and like there are 6 gardens in the outside ramparts. Similarly, like Hayat Bakhsh in Shahjahanabad, it's basically the Hayat Bakhsh is was the personal garden of Shah Jahan. So, and now like environmental historians, they are actually shedding light on these garden cities, the management of gardens in cities, the cultural sense, this urban ecology could actually kind of nurture in these cities and towns of the medieval period, mainly like so far as gardens are concerned, mainly the Mughal cities. Water management, again water management like fascinating systems so far as both the Sultanate and the Mughal periods are concerned. And we would discuss this in detail when we would discuss the social urban social sciences frameworks or approaches like urban environmental history. But for now, very quickly I would like to mention that this Mughal and the Sultanate rulers who came from Central Asia, they also carried that knowledge with them, and several like Islamic so-called Islamic technologies, it got diffused in the Indian subcontinent, which were and this diffusion was so important to kind of make northwest frontier province, which was otherwise so dry, like arid and semi-arid, to become very fertile. So, and the production, agricultural production, it increased like anything. India was also producing like 40 varieties of cash crops. And the cities had very, their cities had very good water management systems, like for example, different lifting devices were used, like the Sakia or the Qanat. And so Qanat, it's also a very important, like it's a very significant water lifting system which came from Iran. And so here, like water could be pumped, water could Qanats could deliver water to the surface by drawing water from the subterranean basin, but without the need of pumping. There are several other structures in these in the medieval cities. So, for example, Hauchkos, which dates back to the time of the Khalji dynasty. So, Hauchkos is the large square tank, 600 meters and 70 acres, 600 meters in length and 70 acres in breadth. And like Ali Yazdi in his Zafarnama says that it was Daryacha, so which means a small sea, and which remained filled with water during the rainy season, and it was also responsible for providing or for meeting drinking water needs for the residents of the city of Delhi. So, very significant water structures. And so these medieval cities are fascinating examples of incorporating ecology in urban spaces, where we get the sense of ecology of rather than ecology in cities. Some references, and so I think I would like to conclude by talking about, or by discussing these key points or key highlights that had been covered in this presentation. So, we discussed how urbanism in ancient India was shaped by complex socio-economic, political and ecological processes, and all these processes integrated and embedded with each other. The Marxist historians, they made the invisible feedback loops visible. So, it is important to go through their works. Though the epicenter of ancient urbanization North India, but other urban centers also emerged as part of exchange and political network. So, Kalinga is a typical case. Medieval India also visualized proliferation of towns with ecology as central to the physical and cultural landscape of Sultanate, but more importantly Mughal cities. So, yes, with this I think we had discussed waves of urbanization. Historically, by shedding light on our historical past, and through coverage of this multiple entanglements between the urban and the environment in these different cities and towns that emerged during the pre-colonial period, that is across the ancient and medieval times. Thank you.